If this story touches your heart, take a moment to reflect on the power of resilience, love. Together, we can celebrate the bonds that make life extraordinary. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more incredible stories. The fading light of the evening painted the dusty desert road in shades of gold and crimson. The roar of engines shattered the stillness as the infamous Iron Vipers, a notorious biker gang, encircled their latest prize, a battered but unyielding Belgian Malinois named Shadow. His once pristine coat was matted with dirt and streaked with blood, his muscles trembling with exhaustion. Yet, his sharp, intelligent eyes remained fixed on the gang, defiant despite the odds stacked against him. Shadow's training as a search and rescue dog had conditioned him for endurance and bravery, but even the strongest heart has its limits. Across the road, hidden among the rocky terrain, Harper Kane watched through binoculars, her heart pounding. A former Navy SAAL turned independent operative, Harper was as tactical as they came, but this wasn't just a mission. Shadow wasn't just a dog, he was her partner, her lifeline, and her family. Every agonizing second of waiting cut her like a knife, but she couldn't afford to act rashly. Her mind raced, calculating every angle, every possibility. Shadow needed her, but a reckless move could make things worse. The gang, drunk on their own bravado, failed to notice the tension building around them. One of the bikers, a towering figure with a snarling wolf tattooed on his neck, stepped forward, swinging a heavy chain with a menacing grin. Shadow, despite his battered state, growled low and steady, a final act of defiance that silenced the gang's jeers momentarily. Then they erupted into laughter, oblivious to the silent storm brewing in the shadows. Harper adjusted her stance, gripping her weapon tighter. With a deep breath, she stepped out from her cover, her voice slicing through the chaos like a blade. "Step away from the dog," she commanded, her tone ice-cold and unwavering. The gang froze, their laughter dying as they turned to face her. Shadow's ears twitched at the familiar voice, and with every ounce of strength left in his body, he limped toward her, his loyalty unbroken. The sight of Shadow dragging himself to Harper's side was a gut punch to the gang, their arrogance faltering. Harper's gaze didn't waver as she knelt beside Shadow, her hand brushing against his head, her voice now soft but firm. "You're stronger than they'll ever be," she whispered. The gang exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the shift in power. Harper was outnumbered, but her unyielding presence and the fierce bond between her and Shadow gave her the upper hand. One by one, the bikers backed away, muttering threats and curses as they mounted their motorcycles and sped off into the night. As the dust settled, Harper crouched to assess Shadow's injuries, her touch gentle yet efficient. "We'll get through this," she murmured, her voice tinged with both relief and anger. As she prepared to carry him to safety, a glint of metal near Shadow's paw caught her eye. Picking it up, she found a small nondescript token engraved with a symbol she didn't recognize. It wasn't just a trinket, it was a clue, a thread to unravel the larger web behind the gang's actions. The immediate danger had passed, but Harper knew this was far from over. Cradling Shadow in her arms, she carried him to her jeep, her mind already spinning with questions. Who were these bikers, and why were they after Shadow? What secrets did the token hold? The fight for Shadow's life had been won, but as Harper gazed into his determined eyes, she knew their journey was just beginning, a story of loyalty, courage, and a bond unbroken, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Together, they would face whatever came next. The distant sirens faded into the night as Harper Kane drove toward her secluded safe house. Shadow lay in the back seat, his chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm, a sign that he was stable for now. Harper's knuckles tightened around the steering wheel, her mind a storm of thoughts. The USB drive she'd found during the chaos was now safely tucked into her jacket pocket, but it felt like it weighed a ton. It wasn't just evidence, it was a target painted squarely on her and Shadow. When they reached the safe house, Harper carried Shadow inside, his weight heavy in her arms, but his presence comforting. The small cabin was modest but secure, nestled deep in the woods. She placed Shadow gently on the padded rug near the fireplace and crouched beside him, her fingers brushing against his fur. "You did good out there," she whispered. Shadow's eyes fluttered open, and he let out a soft whine, nudging her hand with his nose. Despite his injuries, his loyalty was unwavering. After ensuring Shadow was comfortable, Harper turned her attention to the USB drive. She powered up her secure laptop, the screen casting an eerie glow in the dimly lit room. Inserting the drive, she braced herself for what she might uncover. The files loaded quickly, revealing a trove of information, encrypted messages, detailed maps of drop points, and chillingly surveillance photos of her and Shadow during previous operations. Harper's heart sank as she clicked through the images. There were timestamps, locations, and even notes on her movements. The steel serpents had been watching them for months, meticulously planning their ambush. This wasn't random. It was a calculated effort to eliminate her and Shadow. But why? As she dug deeper, she found a file marked Project Viper. Her pulse quickened. Opening the file, she discovered references to a massive illegal arms trade spanning multiple countries. The Steel Serpents weren't just a biker gang. They were part of a global operation. Suddenly, her laptop beeped, signaling an incoming message from an unknown source. The text was simple but chilling. "You've gone too far, Kane. Back off while you still can." Harper's jaw tightened, her hands clenching into fists. This was no idle threat. It was a warning, and whoever sent it had eyes on her. She quickly disconnected the laptop from the network, her mind racing. Every instinct told her to pack up and run, but she knew she couldn't. Backing down now wasn't an option. Shadow stirred, letting out a soft growl that snapped Harper out of her thoughts. She moved to his side, her hand gently stroking his fur. "We're in deep, boy," she murmured. "But we've been in worse. We'll figure this out." As dawn began to break, Harper sat by the window, her eyes scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. The steel serpents were dangerous, but this Project Viper was far more insidious than she'd imagined. Harper's resolve hardened. If they thought they could scare her off, they didn't know who they were dealing with. She glanced at Shadow, now peacefully asleep, his body rising and falling in steady breaths. He'd already proven his loyalty and bravery time and time again. It was her turn to protect him. Harper reached for her phone and called her contact at the agency, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've got a situation," she said. "I need a team and immediate access to every file on Project Viper. And prep the field gear, we're going hunting." The war wasn't over, it had just begun. Harper Kane adjusted the straps on her tactical vest, her mind laser-focused on the growing threat outside. Shadow, though battered and still recovering, stood at her side, his body tense and ears perked toward the encroaching sound of motorcycles. The faint hum was now a rumble, like an approaching storm. Harper could feel the vibration in her chest as she crouched near the door, every muscle in her body coiled for action. "You're not alone in this, Shadow," Harper whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. His quiet whine was both a reassurance and a promise that he wouldn't back down. Harper gave him a nod before sliding over to the table where her laptop was still open. She needed every piece of intel from the USB drive to anticipate the Steel Serpent's next move. The encrypted files revealed more than she had initially realized. Maps, coded communications, and financial transactions painted a picture of a sprawling network, far bigger than she'd imagined. But one glaring name stood out again: Ryan Maddox. Harper's stomach twisted. Maddox had been someone she once trusted back in her military days, before rumors of corruption had forced him into obscurity. Seeing his name connected to the Steel Serpents solidified one thing: this wasn't just about taking her and Shadow out. This was about silencing anyone who could expose them. A sudden loud knock rattled the front door, breaking her concentration. Harper froze, signaling Shadow to stay low. The knock came again, more forceful this time. A voice called out from the other side. "Open up, Kane! We know you're in there." The voice was rough, taunting. Harper's heart raced, but she didn't let fear take over. Instead, she calmly reached for her sidearm and moved toward the window. Peering through the curtains, she counted at least 5 figures standing near the porch, with more figures in the shadows surrounding the safe house. They were trying to intimidate her, but Harper knew better. These were seasoned criminals, and intimidation was just the beginning. Shadow let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the door. "Easy, boy," Harper murmured. "We've faced worse, haven't we?" The sound of glass shattering from the back of the house jolted Harper into action. She swung her weapon toward the noise, adrenaline flooding her system. "Shadow, guard," she commanded. The dog immediately bolted toward the source of the sound, his bark sharp and ferocious. Harper moved swiftly, staying low and using the safe house's layout to her advantage. She spotted a figure attempting to crawl through the shattered window in the kitchen. Without hesitation, Harper fired a warning shot, the bullet embedding itself into the wall inches from the intruder's head. Next, one doesn't miss. Harper barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. The intruder froze, his hands shooting up as he retreated. But the steel serpents weren't deterred. From the corner of her eye, Harper saw Shadow engage another intruder near the hallway. The dog lunged, his teeth sinking into the man's arm, forcing him to drop the crowbar he was wielding. Harper moved quickly to back Shadow up, firing a shot that sent the intruder scrambling out of the house. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was only minutes. Harper's precise movements and Shadow's unrelenting tenacity forced the gang into retreat. The sound of their motorcycles roaring away into the night signaled their retreat, but Harper knew they'd be back. As the dust settled, Harper slumped against the wall, her breaths coming in sharp gasps. Shadow limped over to her, his tail wagging weakly. She smiled through the exhaustion and reached out to stroke his head. "You're a fighter, Shadow. We make one hell of a team." Pulling herself together, Harper secured the house once more and returned to her laptop. The files held the answers she needed: locations, aliases, and even the Steel Serpent's next planned operation. Harper realized this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a war she needed to end, not just for herself, but for anyone who'd been caught in the gang's crosshairs. Looking at Shadow, who had settled beside her, Harper felt a renewed sense of determination. "They're not going to win, Shadow. Not this time." She reached for her phone and dialed a secure number. "This is Harper Kane. I need backup and access to every resource we've got. I'm taking the fight to them." The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Harper Kane adjusted her grip on the tactical shotgun, her eyes narrowing as the gang's leader, Stone, barked orders to his crew. Shadow stood beside her, his growl rumbling low and steady despite his injuries. The dog's loyalty was unwavering, and Harper drew strength from his presence. Outside, the Steel Serpents regrouped, spreading out to encircle the safe house. Stone's voice cut through the night. "We know you're in there, Kane. Hand over the drive, and we might let you walk away." Harper scoffed under her breath, her mind racing through her options. They didn't come this far to negotiate. They were here to finish what they'd started. She quickly scanned the safe house, assessing her resources. The reinforced walls and strategic positioning of exits gave her an edge, but she knew she couldn't rely on defense alone. "Shadow," Harper whispered, crouching next to the dog. "You ready for one more fight?" The German Shepherd let out a sharp bark, his body tensing as the sound of footsteps approached the front door. Harper moved quickly, setting up a diversion. She rigged a smoke grenade near the back window, ensuring that any attempt to flank her would be met with chaos. The first set of bikers moved cautiously toward the front door. Harper could hear their muffled footsteps on the porch. Just as one of them raised a crowbar to smash the lock, Harper pulled the pin on another flashbang and tossed it through the window. The blinding light and deafening sound disoriented the attackers, sending them stumbling back. Taking advantage of the chaos, Harper emerged from a side entrance, her shotgun raised. She fired a warning shot into the ground near one of the bikers, her voice cold and commanding. "Drop your weapon and back off." The man hesitated, his hand twitching toward his holster. Harper didn't flinch, her aim unwavering. "I said drop it," she barked. This time, he obeyed, tossing his weapon to the ground before retreating. Shadow, despite his injuries, charged out to Harper's side, his sharp bark sending a clear message. They were far from defenseless. The dog's presence bolstered Harper's resolve as she moved toward cover, her focus razor sharp. From behind a stack of crates near the garage, Stone's voice boomed again. "You're wasting your time, Kane. We'll burn this place to the ground if we have to." Harper's jaw tightened. She knew Stone wasn't bluffing, but she also knew he didn't realize just how prepared she was. Reaching into her pocket, She retrieved her phone and hit a pre-programmed emergency contact. Reinforcements were on their way, but she had to hold them off until then. As the bikers regrouped, Harper noticed one of them trying to slip around the side of the house. Shadow saw him too, his growl deepening. "Go," Harper whispered, signaling the dog. Shadow lunged, his powerful frame colliding with the man and knocking him to the ground. Harper followed, quickly disarming the attacker and securing his hands with zip ties. The fight escalated as more bikers pressed forward, their bullets ricocheting off the reinforced walls of the safe house. Harper ducked behind cover, returning fire with precision. Her military training kicked in, every move calculated and efficient. The bikers were aggressive but disorganized, giving her the upper hand. Finally, the sound of approaching sirens broke through the chaos. Harper's reinforcements had arrived. Patrol cars screeched to a halt at the edge of the property, officers pouring out and taking control of the scene. The bikers, realizing they were outnumbered, began to retreat, their motorcycles roaring to life as they sped off into the night. Harper lowered her weapon, her breaths coming in short gasps as the adrenaline began to fade. Shadow limped back to her side, his tail wagging faintly despite his exhaustion. "Good boy," she murmured, kneeling to stroke his head. "We did it." Stone, however, wasn't among those who fled. Harper spotted him being wrestled to the ground by one of the officers, his face twisted in rage. As they cuffed him, he locked eyes with Harper. "This isn't over," he snarled. Harper's expression hardened. "It is for you." With the Steel Serpents disbanded and Stone in custody, Harper turned her attention back to Shadow. She knew the fight wasn't truly over until she uncovered the full scope of their operation. But for now, she was grateful for the brief moment of calm and the unshakable bond between her and her loyal partner. Harper Kane crouched beside Shadow, the loyal dog's growl vibrating through the tense silence of the safe house. The dim light from the second floor cast flickering shadows across the room, a stark reminder of the Molotov's earlier damage. Harper's heart pounded as she listened to the heavy boots stomping through the first floor. They'd breached the house, but Harper wasn't about to let them take control. Shadow, despite his injuries, stood by her side, his keen eyes locked on the staircase. Harper whispered, "Stay with me, buddy. We're not letting them win." From her vantage point on the second floor, Harper could see the gang's leader, Stone, pacing outside and barking orders into a radio. His voice carried a tone of urgency and authority. Harper squinted through the scope of her rifle, watching as Stone gestured to his crew, coordinating their moves. She couldn't help but feel that Stone was a piece in a much larger game. Her suspicions were confirmed as she caught sight of two unfamiliar vehicles pulling up behind the line of motorcycles. Men in dark tactical gear stepped out, their presence signaling a level of coordination and resources that far exceeded a local gang's reach. This was bigger than the Steel Serpents. It was part of the network Harper had seen in the USB files. Shadow barked sharply, drawing Harper's attention back inside. The sound of cautious footsteps ascending the staircase echoed through the house. Harper moved quickly, positioning herself behind a door and readying another flashbang. As the first figure appeared, Harper tossed the grenade, the explosion of light and sound stunning the intruders. She emerged from her position, taking them down with swift precision. Shadow joined the fray, his growl deep and ferocious, as he lunged at one of the bikers trying to recover. Despite his injuries, Shadow's strength and determination were unrelenting. Harper felt a swell of pride as the dog held his ground, ensuring no one got past him. Breathing heavily, Harper moved to secure the second floor. The house creaked under the weight of the battle, each sound amplifying the tension. Harper glanced out the window again, catching Stone's gaze as he looked up toward her. His smirk told her he was confident, too confident. Whatever was driving him, Harper needed answers, and fast. Her radio crackled to life, a voice from her backup team cutting through the chaos. "Kane, we're 5 minutes out. Hold your position." Relief washed over her, but she knew 5 minutes could feel like an eternity in the heat of battle. Harper shifted her strategy, moving to the attic where she had hidden a secondary cache of supplies. She grabbed a pair of smoke grenades and set them at the top of the staircase, ready to slow the attacker's advance. Downstairs, Stone's voice echoed again. "Kane, you've got nowhere to go. Give us the drive, and we might let you walk out of here alive." Harper's voice was cold as she shouted back, "Come and get it, Stone! Let's see how that works out for you." Stone's response was laughter, but Harper heard the frustration beneath it. He wasn't used to being challenged, and she planned to use that to her advantage. Shadow limped to her side, his ears pricked for any movement. Harper crouched beside him, running a hand along his head. "One last push, Shadow. Let's finish this." The sound of her backup team's arrival finally cut through the night, the wail of sirens sending a ripple of unease through the gang. Harper moved quickly, using the distraction to take control. She launched a smoke grenade down the staircase, blanketing the first floor in a dense fog that sent the bikers into disarray. With Shadow at her side, Harper advanced, using the chaos to her advantage. As the tactical team stormed the house, the bikers scattered. Harper moved to the front yard, her weapon trained on Stone as he tried to retreat. "You're done, Stone," she shouted. "Drop the radio and get on the ground." Stone hesitated, but eventually obeyed, his bravado cracking under the weight of the situation. Harper approached cautiously, securing him with zip ties before turning to the arriving officers. "Take him in. He's got answers we need." The scene quieted as the remaining bikers were apprehended, the threat finally neutralized. Harper knelt beside Shadow, her hand resting on his back. "We did it, boy," she said softly. Shadow let out a tired huff, leaning into her touch. As the night gave way to the first light of dawn, Harper felt the weight of the battle settle in her chest. This was a victory, but the war was far from over. The network behind Stone and the Steel Serpents was still out there, and Harper knew she and Shadow wouldn't stop until they took it down for good. Harper Kane crouched in the narrow tunnel, the suffocating darkness pressing in on all sides. Shadow was right behind her, his breathing steady but cautious, his ears pricked at the faint sounds of pursuit. Harper's grip tightened on the USB drive, the weight of its contents pressing heavily on her mind. She had to think fast. The Steel Serpents were smarter and more relentless than she'd anticipated. The vibrations in the tunnel walls grew stronger as the sound of footsteps approached. The gang had planned for this. They weren't just brute force attackers, they were strategists. Harper took a slow, deep breath, steadying herself. "We've got this, Shadow," she whispered, reaching back to brush her hand over the dog's head. "We're not going down without a fight." She extinguished the flashlight and let her eyes adjust to the near-complete darkness. The tunnel was long, with a slight curve that worked to her advantage. Her military training kicked in, her mind calculating the distance between her and the approaching gang members. Harper pulled a small device from her tactical vest, a compact smoke grenade. She whispered a quick command to Shadow, who obediently lowered himself to the ground, his growl barely audible in the enclosed space. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by murmured voices. Harper strained to make out their words, catching snippets of commands in frustration. "Don't let him get away," one voice growled. Another added, "Stone wants that drive. We're not leaving without it." Harper held her breath as the first shadow emerged from around the curve. She tossed the smoke grenade down the passage and pressed herself and Shadow against the tunnel wall. The device hissed as it erupted, filling the confined space with thick, choking smoke. Confusion erupted as the bikers stumbled, coughing and swearing, their visibility completely cut off. "Now," Harper whispered, signaling to Shadow. They moved quickly but silently, using the chaos to slip past the disoriented gang members. Harper's hand never left Shadow's fur as they navigated the uneven ground. She could feel the dog's strength and determination fueling her own resolve. As they neared the tunnel's exit, the faint outline of moonlight filtered through the gaps in the trapdoor above. Harper pushed the cover open slowly, scanning the area for signs of an ambush. The woods surrounding the safe house were eerily silent. Harper climbed out first, her weapon at the ready, then helped Shadow up. They were in a dense thicket, hidden from view, but dangerously close to the biker's position. Harper crouched low, pulling out a small map she had stashed in her vest. The tunnel had taken them several hundred yards away from the safe house, but the gang would soon realize where it led. They needed to keep moving. Shadow nudged her, his sharp gaze focused on something in the distance. Harper followed his line of sight and spotted a faint glimmer of light, a cabin. It was likely abandoned, but it could provide temporary cover while she regrouped. "Good eye, partner," she murmured, giving Shadow a quick pat. Moving swiftly but cautiously, Harper and Shadow reached the cabin. It was run down, with broken windows and a sagging roof, but it would do. Harper barricaded the door with a fallen beam and scanned the area for any signs of pursuit. The woods were quiet for now, but she knew it wouldn't last. Inside, Harper pulled out her laptop and reinserted the USB drive. She needed to analyze the files further while she had the chance. As the screen lit up, Shadow settled by the door, his body a silent sentinel against the growing danger. The files revealed more than she expected: blueprints, transaction records, and connections to powerful individuals who seemed untouchable. Harper's jaw tightened as she realized the extent of the network. This wasn't just about the steel serpents. This was a web of corruption, and she was standing at its center. Shadow let out a low growl, drawing Harper's attention back to the present. Footsteps crunched outside, and the faint hum of motorcycles grew louder. The gang had found them. Harper closed the laptop and stood, her weapon in hand. She knelt beside Shadow, meeting his determined gaze. "They don't know who they're up against," she said softly. "Ready to show them?" Shadow's tail wagged once, his loyalty unwavering. Together, they prepared to face the next wave of danger, determined to protect the truth and each other at all costs. Harper Kane crouched low, pulling Shadow close as the forest around them grew tense with the sound of voices and rustling underbrush. The steel serpents were relentless, their determination to recover the USB drive echoing in every shouted order. Harper's pulse remained steady, her years of training sharpening her instincts. But this wasn't just another mission, it was personal. Shadow's ears perked up, his breathing heavy but focused. Despite his injuries, the dog's resolve mirrored Harper's own. "We're not stopping here," Harper whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll outsmart them, Shadow. We always do." The beam of a flashlight swept through the dense trees, grazing their position but missing them by inches. Harper held her breath as a biker's shadow loomed just feet away. The man muttered into his radio. "No sign yet, but they can't have gotten far." Harper's grip on her weapon tightened. She signaled for Shadow to stay low as she carefully surveyed the clearing ahead. The abandoned ranger station was still their best option, but they'd need to make it there without drawing attention. Her mind raced as she formulated a plan. The gang was spreading out, their movements methodical and coordinated. Harper reached into her pack, pulling out a small noise-distracting device. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it toward a cluster of trees to their left. The device emitted a sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the forest. "Over there!" one of the bikers yelled, redirecting the group's attention. Harper didn't waste a second. She guided Shadow through the underbrush, their movements swift and deliberate. Each step brought them closer to the ranger station, but the weight of the pursuit pressed heavily on her shoulders. The steel serpents weren't just after the drive, they wanted to send a message. Finally, the outline of the ranger station emerged through the trees, its weathered structure bathed in pale moonlight. Harper pushed open the creaking door, ushering Shadow inside. The station was small and dilapidated, but it offered the cover they desperately needed. Harper secured the door and quickly scanned the room. A broken table, scattered debris, and an old fireplace were the only notable features. Shadow sank to the floor, his body trembling from exertion. Harper knelt beside him, her hands steady but her heart aching. "You're incredible, you know that?" she murmured, carefully tending to his wounds. Shadow let out a soft whine, resting his head on her knee as if to say he trusted her completely. Harper pulled out her laptop and reinserted the USB drive. The files illuminated the dim room, their contents more damning with every click. Detailed plans for illegal operations, connections to high-ranking officials, and encrypted communications between the gang and a shadowy organization known only as Black Spire painted a grim picture. This wasn't just a smuggling ring, it was a global network. Her focus was interrupted by the distant rumble of motorcycles. Harper's jaw tightened as she realized the gang was closing in. She turned to Shadow, her voice firm. "We're not staying here long, but we'll make our next move count." Harper quickly packed up her equipment and scanned the room for anything she could use. The old ranger station had a few surprises, including a rusted but functional flare gun. She loaded it, knowing it might buy them a few seconds if things went south. The motorcycles grew louder, their engines snarling like predators in the night. Harper positioned herself near the back exit, Shadow by her side. "Ready, partner?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos outside. Shadow gave a faint wag of his tail, his loyalty unwavering. Harper tightened her grip on her weapon and steeled herself for what was to come. They had the evidence, they had the determination, and now they just needed one last push to escape the darkness closing in around them. "Let's show them what we're made of," Harper whispered, her resolve burning brighter than ever. Harper Kane crouched low behind the makeshift barricade, her heart pounding as the bikers approached the ranger station. Shadow stirred beside her, his loyalty unwavering despite his exhaustion. Harper placed a firm hand on his back, whispering, "Stay, buddy. I've got this." The faint crunch of boots on gravel and the occasional murmur of the bikers' voices drew closer. Harper's grip on her shotgun tightened, her mind racing through possibilities. The ranger station wasn't fortified enough for a prolonged standoff, and the steel serpents were relentless. She needed to end this quickly and decisively. Through the cracked window, Harper spotted the two men splitting up, one circling toward the back of the station. She positioned herself near the front entrance, her body tense as she listened for the faintest sound. Shadow's ears perked, his low growl a subtle warning. The first biker reached the door, his flashlight beam slicing through the gaps in the barricade. "She's in there," he hissed. Harper waited until he leaned in closer, then struck. She kicked the door outward with a calculated force, throwing the man off balance. In the same motion, she fired a warning shot into the ground near his feet. "Drop it!" Harper barked, her voice cold and commanding. The biker froze, his hands slowly rising. But his hesitation gave the second man the opportunity to slip in through the back. Shadow's growl deepened, and Harper spun around just in time to see the intruder creeping toward her. The dog launched himself forward, ignoring his injuries, and sank his teeth into the biker's arm. The man yelled in pain, struggling to shake Shadow off. Harper didn't hesitate, disarming him with a swift strike and kicking his weapon across the floor. "Good boy, Shadow," Harper murmured as she secured the second biker with zip ties. The first man, still frozen in fear, didn't dare move as she turned her attention back to him. "On the ground. Now," she ordered, her voice leaving no room for argument. Once both bikers were restrained, Harper leaned in close, her tone icy. "Who sent you? What's the end game here?" The first man sneered but remained silent. The second, wincing from Shadow's attack, muttered, "You're just making this harder on yourself, lady. Hand over the drive, and maybe we'll let you walk away." Harper's jaw tightened. Not happening. Outside, the distant hum of more motorcycles echoed through the woods, signaling reinforcements. Harper's window of opportunity was shrinking fast. She needed a plan, and she needed it now. Turning back to her laptop, Harper scanned the map she'd found on the USB drive. One of the marked locations wasn't far from their current position, a seemingly abandoned warehouse. It could be a hub for the Steel Serpent's operations, or at the very least, a lead she couldn't ignore. She glanced at Shadow, who had returned to her side, his breathing labored but his spirit unbroken. "We've got to move, partner," Harper said, her resolve hardening. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." Harper grabbed her gear and secured the restrained bikers to a heavy metal pipe in the corner. "Don't go anywhere," she quipped, her tone sharp. She then turned to Shadow, helping him up. "One more push, buddy. Let's finish this." As they slipped out the back of the ranger station and into the cover of the forest, Harper's determination burned brighter than ever. The Steel Serpents thought they could outnumber and overpower her, but they had underestimated her resilience and the unbreakable bond she shared with Shadow. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a beacon of danger and potential answers. Harper moved with purpose, her mind focused on the task ahead. The Steel Serpents wanted a fight, and she was ready to give it to them on her terms. Harper Kane crouched low against the station's rickety walls, Shadow pressed close to her side. The bullets had stopped for now, but the gang shouts and the hum of approaching bikes made it clear this was just the calm before the storm. "We're not staying here," Harper whispered, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to let them corner her, not with the USB drive in her possession, and certainly not with Shadow in his weakened state. The stakes were too high. She scanned the room quickly, her sharp eyes landing on an old ventilation shaft partially hidden behind a stack of rusted tools. It was narrow and barely large enough to crawl through, but it offered a glimmer of hope. "Shadow, come," Harper murmured, motioning to the dog. He limped after her, his loyalty overshadowing his pain. Harper worked quickly, pulling the tools aside and prying the cover off the vent. The metallic groan of the screws echoed faintly, and she froze, listening. The voices outside grew louder, closer. She worked faster. "Move, partner," Harper urged softly, guiding Shadow into the shaft first. The dog hesitated, his ears twitching at the distant sound of boots crunching on gravel. "Go," she whispered again, her voice firm yet gentle. Shadow obeyed, his body disappearing into the darkness of the vent. Harper followed, sliding him backward just as the front door splintered open behind her. The gang stormed inside, their flashlights slicing through the dusty air. Harper held her breath, pulling the vent cover loosely back into place from inside. Her heart pounded as Stone's voice echoed through the small space. "Search the place." She couldn't have gotten far. Boots thudded across the floor above her as the gang ransacked the station. Harper and Shadow moved slowly, inching their way through the tight vent. The metal walls felt suffocating, the air stale, but they pressed on, determined. Finally, the vent opened into the thick underbrush of the forest. Harper pushed the cover aside and helped Shadow out, the cool night air a stark contrast to the claustrophobic shaft. She didn't stop to catch her breath, knowing the gang would discover her escape route at any moment. "Come on, Shadow," she urged, pulling the dog along as they moved deeper into the woods. Behind them, shouts erupted, followed by the roar of engines once more. Harper clenched her jaw, her determination sharpening. They weren't out of the woods yet, literally or figuratively, but she wasn't about to give up. Not now. With Shadow at her side, Harper pressed forward into the night, the USB drive secured and her resolve stronger than ever. Equals, 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 equals. Equals 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 equal equals equal equals 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 equal equals 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 equals. Harper Kane leaned back against the creaking walls of the dilapidated cabin, the weight of exhaustion settling over her like a heavy blanket. Shadow lay at her feet, his breathing shallow but steady. The dog's loyalty and resilience were her only constant in a night that had turned into a chaotic battle for survival. Harper gently stroked his fur, her mind racing despite her physical fatigue. The USB drive in her pocket seemed heavier with every passing second. It wasn't just a piece of evidence, it was the key to unraveling the Steel Serpent's operation and exposing the web of corruption they were entangled in. Harper couldn't shake the memory of Ryan Maddox, a name that had once stood for camaraderie and honor, but now carried a bitter sting of betrayal. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracked windows, casting long shadows across the cabin's dusty floor. Harper opened her laptop, careful to stay alert for any sound outside. The files on the USB drive were a puzzle she was determined to solve, each fragment of information another piece of a larger, darker picture. Her eyes scanned the detailed map of smuggling routes, noting their proximity to small towns and law enforcement offices. Maddox's name appeared in several places, alongside coded notes that hinted at his influence over key operations. Harper's stomach churned at the realization. This wasn't just about weapons or money, it was about control, power, and the willingness to destroy lives to maintain it. Shadow stirred at her feet, lifting his head as if sensing her unease. Harper reached down, offering him a reassuring pat. "We're gonna figure this out," she said softly, more for herself than for him. A sudden rustling outside snapped Harper's focus back to the present. She froze, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. Shadow tensed, his ears perked and his growl low but steady. Harper moved silently to the window, peering through the broken pane. A figure moved cautiously through the underbrush, their silhouette partially obscured by the trees. The gang had tracked them again. Harper's jaw tightened as she quickly closed the laptop and secured the USB drive. This wasn't the time to linger. She needed to act fast before the steel serpents closed in. She turned to Shadow, his determination mirrored in her own eyes. "We've got to move, partner," she whispered, her voice resolute. "But this time, we're taking the fight to them." Gathering her gear, Harper prepared for the next leg of their journey, knowing the road ahead would be even more perilous, but also knowing she and Shadow wouldn't stop until they saw justice served. Harper Kane's mind raced as she studied Ryan Maddox standing in the clearing, hands raised, his expression carefully composed. The man who once fought by her side was now tangled in the web of corruption she was trying to dismantle. Trusting him felt like playing with fire, but Maddox had been right about one thing: the steel serpents were just the tip of the iceberg. Shadow, crouched at Harper's side, let out a low growl, his instincts on high alert. Harper placed a steadying hand on his back, her weapon still aimed at Maddox. "Start talking," she said, her voice sharp as the tension in the air. Maddox nodded, his gaze flickering to the shadows of the forest around them. The steel serpents don't act alone. They're part of a syndicate powerful enough to infiltrate law enforcement, politicians, and security contractors. The USB drive you have? It's not just evidence. It's a key. A key to their network, their funds, their entire operation. Harper's grip tightened on her weapon. "Why are you telling me this now?" Maddox's jaw clenched. "Because they'll stop at nothing to get it back. And if they do, you're not the only one who'll pay the price. Innocent people, entire communities, this syndicate will tear through everything to maintain control. I know because I've seen it." Shadow shifted slightly, his body tense, but waiting for Harper's cue. She studied Maddox, searching for any hint of deceit in his words or his posture. "You expect me to believe you want to help?" "I do," Maddox replied, his tone unflinching. "I made mistakes, Harper. Big ones. But this is my chance to set it right. I know how they think, where they'll strike next. Let me help you bring them down." Harper hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of doubt and urgency. Shadow let out a soft whine, and Harper glanced at her loyal companion. "If this is a trap," she said coldly, "you won't live to regret it." Maddox nodded solemnly. "Understood." Harper lowered her weapon slightly, though her finger stayed near the trigger. "You've got one shot, Maddox. Don't make me regret this." As the weight of her decision settled, Harper knew one thing for sure: the fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about dismantling the syndicate and ensuring they never hurt anyone again. The story of Harper Kane and Shadow is more than just a gripping tale of survival and courage. It reflects important lessons we can apply to our everyday lives. At its core, the story emphasizes resilience, trust, and the importance of standing up against adversity, even when the odds feel insurmountable. Harper's journey mirrors the struggles many of us face navigating challenges, confronting betrayals, and finding strength in unexpected places. In life, we often encounter situations that test our resolve, much like Harper faced with the relentless pursuit of the steel serpents. These moments require us to remain calm under pressure, think strategically, and rely on the support systems we've built. Shadow's unwavering loyalty reminds us of the importance of trusted relationships. Whether it's a loyal friend, family member, or colleague, having someone who stands by you through tough times can make all the difference. Cultivate these relationships and nurture them, as they are your allies when challenges arise. Maddox's introduction in the story highlights a valuable lesson about second chances and the complexity of trust. In life, we will meet people with checkered pasts or who may have let us down before. The decision to give them a chance depends on weighing their actions, intentions, and the potential consequences. Be cautious, but open-minded sometimes. People who have stumbled can offer unique insights and invaluable assistance if their intentions are genuine. Lastly, Harper's decision to fight back rather than run reflects the importance of confronting problems head-on. In our own lives, running from challenges often prolongs the inevitable. Instead, face difficulties with determination and a plan, much like Harper did when she decided to dismantle the syndicate rather than hide. The advice we can take from this story is simple yet powerful. Stay resilient in the face of adversity, surround yourself with loyal allies, evaluate trust carefully, and face challenges with a clear, purposeful strategy. By doing so, you not only survive but emerge stronger and more capable of navigating life's complexities. Like Harper and Shadow, our struggles can lead us to greater strength and purpose if we embrace the lessons along the way.